know it's no pain, no gain. Go hard till the end. What's the use of playing the game if you ain't aiming to win? My feet.
For the applause, I appreciate it. I get that very rarely.
So yeah, let's have a seat and we're gonna do a little fireside chat.
This isn't electrified, is it? I'm a little nervous.
So Randy, you know, you moved to, I mean, you were born in on the East Coast, and then you moved to Silicon Valley some time ago, right? Like a few years ago only, right?
Probably before most of these people were born. I was born on a small island in Maine, which was an interesting way to grow up. It was interesting because there were only 500 people on the island, and my father was a barber there. But in the summertime, there were 5,000 people, and they're all worth about $100 million each. So it was an interesting contrast to watch that, coming from, you know, a very simple life, but good life, and watching these rich kids, which I'm like, rich kids, I don't like that too much. But anyway, fast forward, I was in Washington, D.C. I did a bunch of things in between that, growing up and then. But I was in Washington, D.C. in the early 80s, running a public company. I got into the company, it was called IIAT, which stood for International Institute of Applied Technology, which basically doesn't mean anything. But I was a CEO, and the way I got to be CEO is that I joined on as general manager, and the CEO had a bit of a drinking problem, and so...
Like many of them?
Yeah, well, I have lots of stories, of course I can't tell. But so one board meeting, I guess he passed out in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York, and we were having the board meeting in Washington, and he didn't show up. So the board said, we're going to fire him and we'll make you CEO. And he had a lot of stock, and he was a founder, and it was a public company. So they did that, and they said, your first job is to fire him. And he was taller than... Do you want it louder or softer?
We want to, you guys in the back, you probably don't see much, right? We want to get the tall chair. Can we get the tall chair?
Oh, for me?
Because it's probably, it's
Are you
very
implying,
hard. No, one for me and one for you. It's very hard for the people in the back. Bring two, yeah. Close. I know, we're a little low right here.
You want me to stand up? I don't really want to stand up. It's okay.
Yeah, sit down, yeah.
I'm not much to look at, so if you can't see me, just listen to me anyway. Yeah, and so, now I don't know where I was.
I'm sorry,
okay.
I stole
it. So
we were talking about drinking CEOs.
Yeah, and I was supposed to fire him, so he comes back, sobers up, comes back from New York, and he talks about your height, and he pins me up against the wall, and I tell him he's fired, and finally he decides he doesn't want to go to jail, so he leaves. And so, fast forward 2 years forward, and we didn't have much money then in the company.
There you go, I want one too. Yeah, I want one too, right here.
Okay.
I know, we should have
moved this chair out of the way?
Yeah, we'll take that one out. Perfect.
It's really tough.
Is it better this way? You guys can see us better? All right.
All right, hi.
You know, I feel like I'm at the bar, right? Drinking with the CEOs.
Anyway, fast forward, I was able to build up a $100 million backlog in sales. And I was in there for about 2 years, and it comes time for an annual meeting. Now, public companies have annual meetings, in which case the new board is reelected. And it's reelected by the vote of the shareholders. Now, what I didn't know, because I was dumb, was that the ex-president had more shares than all the people I knew. And he had a proxy battle. The proxy battle is when they replaced your board with their board. And after the proxy battle, after they replaced your board with their board, they fired the CEO. And so they fired me right after the annual meeting, and I'm like, this kind of stuff, this sucks. I built up all this backlog, I did a good job, and now they took it away from me. So I was kind of sulky and grumpy in those days, and I decided what I would do is retreat from Washington, D.C. and go back to a small island in Maine that was not the island I grew up on, but it was very, very remote. And I decided I'd live off my credit cards. I didn't have a lot of money, and they certainly weren't paying me anymore, and the stock wasn't worth anything yet. So I spent an entire year on that island. And while I was there, the Macintosh had just come out. It was '84. And I decided I liked the interface, it was really cool. And so I decided what I would do is get an IBM PC and write the same interface for an IBM PC, so that you could have, you know, it could be a Windows-based thing. It was before Windows came out. It was like 3 years before Windows came out. But I spent the whole year there, just with my dog, and programmed. And at the end of the year, a couple of things happened. One is my credit cards all got shut off, and the other is they repoed my car. So that wasn't too good. So, but the product was done. So I thought, well, how am I going to sell this thing? How am I going to distribute it? And so at that time, you could contact a software publisher how's my volume? Okay. You could contact a software publisher out in Valley, and I contacted the people who were making clip art and fonts for the Mac, because I was totally compatible with Mac fonts and clip art. In fact, I even licensed fonts from Apple. They were done in their license agreement, didn't say I had to use it on a Mac, so I'm using it on a PC. And so I found a wonderful woman by the name of Heidi Roizen, who is now a venture capitalist with Draper Fisher Turbinson. And Heidi had a little company called Teamaker that was publishing clip art, fonts, and things like that. And she said, well, why don't you come out? And I thought, oh God, they're gonna put me up in a nice hotel, and they're gonna let me program this. This is great. My credit cards don't work, and I don't have a car, and all this stuff. And I got out there, and they put me in the Coronet Hotel on El Camino, which was a lot worse then than it is now. And there were a lot of bugs and stuff. And then they decided they couldn't afford that anymore. And then Heidi said, well, you can sleep in my downstairs bedroom, but I want you to work at least 15 hours a day doing programming so we can get the product launched. And we launched the product about 6 months later, and we ended up selling it to a guy named Fred Gibbons, who had a company called Software Publishing Corporation at the time, and it was called PFS First Publisher. And it sold a whole bunch of copies. It was the first desktop publishing app for the PC. And they gave me a check for $500,000, and I'm like, this is so weird. I'm like broke, and my car gets repoed, and like 6 months later, I'm driving a Porsche. So it's like insane.
Silicon Valley for you.
That's the way it happens, right? But you never know. It's serendipity. Sometimes things work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes you're Instagram, and you go out and you pivot into Instagram, and all of a sudden you get bought for a whole bunch of money. It doesn't happen that often, quite frankly. So I was doing that, and we only talk about next.
Yeah. So then you ended up working with Steve Jobs, right?
Yeah. So in the Valley at the time, it was a very much smaller network of people that were doing developing and coming up with apps. I mean, it was like probably like under 100 people, probably minimum like 50. And in terms of people that were successful in doing them, it was more like 10. At that time, Steve had gotten fired by Apple and started a company called Next to produce a new computer. And one of the guys I met at Teamaker, who was a developer, went over and started working at Next. And he told Steve, like, you gotta hire Randy because he just did the whole Mac operating system on the PC. And like, it wasn't quite that. And so they called me an interview, and I interviewed with Steve and with the software development group. And it went well with Steve. Steve said, what makes you tick, Randy? And I said, well, sometimes I go to bed at night and I have a problem I can't solve. And I wake up at 4 in the morning, and all of a sudden, miraculously, it's solved. And I live for those moments. And he said, okay, you're hired. And so, but they did not give me much money. They didn't even give me enough money when they hired me to cover the taxes on the royalties I was receiving with the other products. So I'm like, well, this is ridiculous. I'm just going to stay in my apartment in San Francisco and drive my Porsche around and have a good time. The problem when you do that is there's nobody to play with. Everybody else is working, and like, who are you going to play with? So it was boring. And then Steve called me up. I turned it down. Steve called me up and left a message on my answering machine. He said, you're blowing it. This is the worst mistake you've ever made in your life. I can't believe you're such an idiot. I can't believe we offered to hire such an idiot, but the job's still open if you'd like it. So that's how I joined Next.
How about other Steve stories? I know you have quite a bit of an arsenal there.
Some of them I can't tell.
I can imagine.
I don't know who would sue me, but somebody would do it. There's a bunch of Steve stories. So I had this Porsche, and Steve also bought a new 911, and we parked them in the parking lot in 3 spaces so that we didn't get door dings, and that was kind of our thing every day. And so, but they were in the front parking lot of a building on Deer Creek Road in Palo Alto. And we were trying to get money. Steve wanted to raise money, and he had talked Ross Perot into putting $20 million into the company. Well, he hadn't put it in yet, but he was going to, into Next. And one day, Steve said, Randy, we've got to move the Porsches. I'm like, why? He said, Ross Perot's coming. I don't want him to think we're rich. Like,
that's where the $20 million will go to, right? To support the Porsche habit.
Yeah, and then one time, Bill Gates would come occasionally. One time he came down, and everybody had cubes. Steve had a cube. We're upstairs on the top level where the programmers were, and Steve was there. And the lobby was in the downstairs level. And Bill Gates came to the meeting at the appointed time. And Steve just sat up there and like just played games for an hour and made Bill sit on the couch downstairs for an hour. And that was it with Steve. You could tell how important you were by how much he made you wait. And I had meetings later where he was like, I'm with my marketing guy, and I'm like, this is when he got back at Apple, and I'm like, I hope it's an hour. He did that for Bill Gates, but we all went down at the time at Next, and we sat next to Bill, and we started asking him questions, like how often do you get to spend an hour like trapped with Bill Gates trapped, and you have to answer questions? It was really cool. It was really cool.
So much of it is like putting yourself out there, making sure you put yourself in positions to be able to succeed in certain cases, and
it's risk-taking.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's risk-taking. You sometimes you fail, and it's miserable, and you got to pick yourself back up and convince yourself that I'm just gonna keep going, or I'm gonna pivot, or I'm gonna do something, but I'm not gonna stop, and I'm not gonna give up. And if you never give up, you never lose.
Yeah.
We die, but you never lose.
And after Next, then you started up another software company.
Next at that time, the design was screwed up. They had it was a big black box. You might have seen it, but they used a Unix derivative mock operating system, and a mock operating system does a lot of swapping of tasks in and out, and Linux does, they all do, even the newer operating systems now do. But the only mass storage they had was an optical disk drive, because Steve thought it was cool, because nobody was using an optical disk drive. What he didn't realize is that the seek time was something like a second. And what that means to an operating system that is just slamming the disk all the time is that the thing is mercilessly slow. It's like horribly slow. But we didn't have the machine built yet. I'd seen the designs, and I was doing the software toolbox for it. And we're at an engineering meeting, like 10 of us, and Steve was running it. And I said, Steve, this thing is going to thrash itself to death. It's just really a bad design. And Steve looked around the room, and he said, does anybody agree with Randy? And nobody said a word. I'm like, well, I'm wasting my time here. I'm getting the hell out. So I quit, and I started a software company called Emerald City Software, because I kind of like the Wizard of Oz. I thought that would be kind of a cool name. And then people in Seattle told me, look, we're the Emerald City, you shouldn't use that. Are you from Seattle? And I never even knew. And so I actually built that company up, took in $1 million in venture. It was my first venture-backed company out of Sand Hill. And it was pretty easy in those days. Well, actually, I had some traction. I wrote a PostScript debugger, if you can imagine. It's such a crazy thing to write. But it sold really well, and it got the attention of Adobe. And I got $1 million in venture capital, and about 2 years in, we came up with more products that played on Adobe's product line. And Adobe bought the company and put me in as basically as the CTO. And they had Illustrator and Photoshop, and I had 10 products. Yeah. And I had 200 people working for me.
How was that like, taking a startup guy and then sticking you in a larger corporation?
It was horrible.
Yeah.
I would be like, I go home and I'm like, oh, I can't believe it. And instead of like thinking up ideas and working with cool developers and making stuff, I had to sit in meetings all day long. And people would have different views, and you had to listen to them and respect them. and it was the only fun part was that one day Warnock, who was the CEO, came to me and said, we have to save trees. I'm like, okay, John, what would you like me to do to save trees? And he said, we have to eliminate paper. I'm like, okay, how would you, okay, let me think about that. And so I pulled 3 of our best engineers and we went into a room, a skunk works room, where we worked for 2 months. And at the end of 2 months, we showed it to Warnock and we said, look, there's pictures of the pages down the side, and you click on the page and it shows up full size, and it's scalable. And you can save it in a format and other people can use it. And he said, what should we call it? And we said, it's like a slide, back in the day when you had slide projection on a carousel. I said, we'll call it Carousel. And then, of course, it got changed to Acrobat and PDF. But it was cool. We did more for Adobe's revenues down the road in 3 months than was done in like 10 years. Wow. So it goes to show you that if your timing's right and your product's right, you don't have to work at it forever. Sometimes it happens really fast. And if it doesn't happen really fast, that's probably a sign that it's not quite right.
So talking about timing, that's when you got, after Adobe, it was then Yahoo, you got introduced to Jerry and David, or how did that transpire?
No, there was an in-between. So Steve, so the story is I'm working at Adobe, hating it. And Steve Jobs calls me up one day and goes, "Hey Randy, you were right about that thrashing thing, but we've got a new one and it has a hard disk in it. And what you should do is quit your job at Adobe and we'll give you the word processor that we paid for and you should do software for the next machine." And I'm like, that sounds like more fun than what I'm doing. Yeah, okay, let's do that. So I met with him and I created this company called AppSoft. Now he has some detractors who call it CrapSoft online. Very nice. So I never pick a name that people can like change and make fun of. And I financed it myself, and at the first Next World, Mike Moritz from Sequoia Capital, who was just a junior partner at the time, came up to me and said, "What are you doing?" I said, because he had noticed the other exit, because when we exit to Adobe, the VC made some money. I said, we're doing software for the next machine, and he said, "Wow, we might be interested in that." I said, "Oh, if they don't do the next machine, it's going to die. You're going to lose your money." And he said, "Well, you know what, we'll take a risk." And so I went in, I presented, and they wrote us a check for $2 million. And I hired people, and we produced like 10 products, like a draw program, an Illustrator program, a spreadsheet. We had the word processor and a bunch of others after about a year. And we went through about $1 million. And one night, Steve called me up and he said, "Randy, I just want you to know, we're not going to do hardware anymore." And so I was kind of teed off. So I wrote an email and Carbon, his president, and I said, "Just to confirm, you said you're not going to do software, you're not going to do hardware anymore, and you'd rather sell dog shit than PCs." And this is a direct quote. And so the next day his president quit, because I guess he hadn't told his president that he wasn't going to do hardware anymore. And so Steve was kind of trying to call me, and I'm like, "Oh shit, I'm not going to take this call. He's going to be really pissed at me." And then at the time, my ex-wife used to be his executive assistant, and so I was like, "You take the call. You can talk to him." She's like, "He wants to talk to you. Tell him I'm gone." And I did this for like 4 days. So I feel like after 4 days, he's probably going to calm down a little bit. And after 4 days, I took the call, and the first thing he said was, "You effed me," and he didn't say F. And I'm like. And they said it 5 times really loud. And then I said, I think you might have done that to yourself. I mean, after all, I didn't know that you did. I was just confirming what you said. And anyway, I'm like, oh, that wasn't very good. That was kind of a stupid move. So I went back. It was 2 weeks before Christmas. I shut the company down. And we moved we had about $250,000 in inventory. We moved all the inventory into my garage. And it was all boxed Next software. And we gave $1 million back to Sequoia. And we killed it, and now I'm in my garage with a whole bunch of software. I'm like, what the heck am I going to do with this stuff? And so I basically figured out, we didn't have the web then, but we had a Usenet, right, which was basically different forums where you could post stuff. And I said, well, maybe there are the Next users out there. Maybe they want the software and discount it. So I started selling it on Usenet. And I liquidated $250,000 worth of inventory online. And that was like in 1993.
Yeah. And that's how you ended up starting to realize that the internet, which was Usenet at that time, is something that could potentially, businesses could be, created on that. And that's when you got kind of connected with and heard of Yahoo at that time, or?
No, not yet.
There's more in between that? I'm getting the chronology.
You're getting too fast. Okay, I know this is like the fast.
Just keep talking forever.
Yeah. It was the first e-commerce site, right? That was the internet shopping network?
We didn't have a web browser back then. We had Gopher, which was some dumb thing that it was useful.
I have gophers in my backyard.
Yeah, well, this was a gopher that it wasn't in your backyard. In the fall of, I think I might have the year wrong. In the fall of '93, Andreessen at the University of Illinois created the first browser called Mosaic, and it was kind of secret for a while, and then I found out about it because I was trying to figure out a way I could automate the sales online, because I'm like, hell, I just got $250,000 back. And so I found out about Mosaic, and at the time it was you couldn't have a .com and do commercial business. It was illegal in the United States, and it wasn't until Al Gore passed the law, we pushed the law through in January of 94, I think, that you could do that. But I had, before that, said, I'm going to put a catalog of things to buy on the internet. It would be kind of cool. So I went down, there was a distributor called Ingram Micro in Southern California that distributed hardware and software, all the hardware and software products. So I went down and talked to one of the sales guys, and I'm like, hey, I want to sell your stuff on the internet. And they're like, go away. We don't want to talk to you. We don't even know what you're talking about. So then I'm like, oh, but I better get another sales guy and ask it differently. So I went home, I came back down, and I said, do you guys have a soft copy of your catalog? And say, yeah, we do. And do you guys drop ship if I send you an order electronically? And they're like, yeah, we do. I'm like, cool, give me the soft copy and sign me up. And then we got together with some people at CommerceNet at the time who were employing Mark Andreessen, because it was before he joined Netscape. And we created this internet shopping network thing. And after 3 months, I went to the first internet world. Seems to be a lucky thing going to the first whatever world. People from the Home Shopping Network came up and said, we'd like to buy your company. And I'm like, really? And that's only 3 months. And like 3 months later, they bought it, and it was publicized. Now we're getting to the Yahoo part. And Jerry Young and David Filo were in the back at Trailer in the back of Stanford, and they had Yahoo up, and it had traction. And they called me up and said, we want to talk to you. And so I set up a lunch. And the morning of the lunch, Mike Moritz called me and said, hey, what's going on the internet? Anything hot? And I'm like, I don't know, I'll get back to you on that. And I had lunch with Jerry and David, and they said, Netscape's offered to buy us for $1 million. Should we do that? I said, I think you should take venture capital. Your company could be worth $10 million. You never know. And they said, well, we don't trust anybody in the venture capital business. And I said, I just lost $1 million worth of Sequoia's money. They still talk to me. They called me this morning. We should go talk to them. They're like, okay, you set it up. And so then I call Moritz, and I'm like, I think I found something, Mike. Let's go talk. So we went into the Sequoia. In those days, it was very informal. And there was no pitch. There was no business plan. There was no deck. We walked in. Jerry and David didn't have a business plan. They didn't know what they were going to do. They had traction. And Mike and I sat on one side, and they sat on the other, and they explained the company, and Mike said, okay, I'll give you $1 million for 20%. And they're like, great, we're going to have to give 100% for $1 million. You can have 20%. And he's like, Randy, you can put 100,000 in co-invest. And I'm like, I don't know if this company's going to make it, Mike, which happened to do at the end of the day be $1 billion mistake. But, and so Yahoo was started, and then I helped them get the business plan together, and we hired Tim Kugel, and I sat on the board of directors for the first year, and it was a pretty interesting time. It was one of those frothy times where the internet was taking off, and they had 100% week over week growth, and it was amazing. And they didn't have a revenue model, but they were smart about it, and Mike helped them and put the advertising revenue model together.
How do you feel about Yahoo nowadays with the sale recently, and you've seen them go through their slow process up until now?
Well, I met with Jerry like a couple of weeks ago in his micro VC fund, and I must say, he told me he's extremely happy. He doesn't have to go to stupid meetings and put up with press and anything else, and he gets to see his kids. So that's cool. I think Yahoo began the downward spiral when they decided that they were going to be a media company. And I think that, when Terry Semel took over, that was the beginning of the end. Kugel had run it pretty well up to then. It was up and to the right. But when Semel took over and decided, he's a Hollywood guy, it's going to be a media company, we're going to use a distribution platform, and it just went downhill from there, and they still haven't changed that philosophy, quite frankly. And then they lost the edge. They lost the search edge to Google. They lost it just wasn't innovating in the tech. No, well, I have a story about that as well. In the day, Google was powering Yahoo search, and it had branding on it. And I'm thinking like, wow, man, they should buy Google, because if they don't, most of the traction is in search. They're gonna lose out. So I ran into Larry Page at the annual Kleiner Perkins Christmas party, I guess holiday party, at the Circus Club in Menlo Park, and I'm like, you guys gonna screw Yahoo, aren't you? And he's like, I know what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about.
So you worked with Barry Diller. How was he like? He's quite a character.
I probably made the mistake of remember Upside Magazine? You remember Upside Magazine? Yeah. I made a mistake in Outside Magazine is saying Barry Diller was like a geriatric Steve Jobs, which really wasn't very nice. Now that I'm geriatric, I can see how I might have been offended. But they didn't just put it in the text, they blew it up. You know how they blow up like a line in the middle of the whole text?
So it stood up.
Yeah, but I worked for him he took over the Home Shopping Network, and I worked for him when I was running the internet division, which is what I ended up running. So yeah, he would call me into his office at least once a week for a 3-hour session to explain the internet, which I think I did a good job because ISC seems to be doing fairly well.
Yeah, he invested in a lot of the internet companies.
Yeah, he never invested in my stuff again after that comment. I think maybe that was a mistake. Another thing, don't say things that people throw back in your face later, unless you happen to be Steve Jobs and have a lot of money.
Maybe we'll get there. So you had the opportunity to work with Tim Draper, Moritz, Heidi Roizen, and you had an opportunity to work with them, right? I mean, they're all billionaires right now, right? So how does that make you feel?
Feels sad.
This is Dr. Phil sent this question in. Yeah. How does it make you feel when all your friends are billionaires?
It makes me feel sad, but I'm happy, actually. Back when Tim started Draper Fisher Jurgensen, he invited me in to try out as a partner. And I sat through the first pitches and I decided, okay, 99% of these deals we're going to flush. That means 99% of my time I'm going to be listening to bullshit, and I don't really want to listen to that. It's just, how can I spend my time doing that? It's like a waste of time. Now, if I thought about how much money I'd make and that's all I cared about, I probably would have done it and put up with it and been miserable, but I wanted to go out and create things. That's the fun part, is creating something from nothing. When you do a startup, you're creating something from nothing. It's like, for a while I'd do a startup every time we had a baby, and after 7 babies, I kind of slowed down on that.
So serial entrepreneur 7 times?
Actually, I'm 8.
All right, so you moved to LA, right? How did you end up in Hollywood and working with Will Ferrell and Marlon Wayans?
Well, we cannot go fast forward past 2 companies, but
all right, we can pass on those, right? We have time. You have time? Yeah, you like stories? Me too.
Crazy stories.
Yeah.
So, let's see, where are we? Navitel. Actually, there's 3 companies in between that. So after I left the Home Shopping Network, I thought it must have been in 98 maybe. Yeah, 98, because that's the beginning of the big uprun. I thought, what would be really cool is to have a phone that you can browse the web on. That'd be really cool. So I got one of the Next engineers, because Next had kind of blown up, to design me something based on the Philips chipset, a desktop phone, because we didn't have wireless high-powered phones at that time. And we put a touch panel LCD screen on it. And I said, we need an OS, so I went up to Microsoft and I said, we want to use your Windows CE stuff to be on a phone. And they're like, you're insane. And then the other thing is, if people tell you you're insane, don't listen to them. It's just, everybody will tell you, it's like a very fragile thing when you start a company, and it doesn't take much to kill it, and you have to protect it. And you have to protect it because there will always be somebody that tells you what you're doing is stupid, and it will never go anywhere. Anyway, so we went up and we actually were able to license Windows CE and put it on and get it running. We took it up to CES, and we were ready to manufacture. Compaq made us an offer to manufacture it. And then Microsoft came back and said, look, you can either let us put $10 million in the company and you can license us the software that you put on top of it. It was great. It was touch-oriented. It wasn't the iPhone, but it was pretty good. Or we're going to compete with you. And well, that's a no-brainer, right? So we took in $7 million from Microsoft, and then 2 years later, we sold the company for what ended up, by the time we were liquid to be $200 million. So it was a pretty good exit. So
nice. I'll take that. Okay, so what's next after that?
Well, after that, I've got a lot of crap in my garage because I've done all these startups, and after the Adobe thing, I learned that you don't give the hardware away to the acquiring company, you just put it in your garage. And so I had a lot of stuff in my garage, and my wife said, hey, we should sell it on eBay. And I said, sure, and I tried to list it, and it took a pain in the butt. I mean, it's like the worst UX in the world. Still isn't great. And so I said, you know what, we should create a store where people can drop off stuff to sell on eBay, and we'll list it for them and do it. So we created Auction Drop, and there's a big billboard on 101 that said, you drop it off, we sell it on eBay. And we created 5 stores, and we got funded by Heidi Roizen, and we ended up having this incredible board. Ron Johnson, the guy that created the Apple Store, was on it. Heidi was on it, Tim Draper was on it, a guy named Phil Schlein, used to be the CEO of Macy's, and the guy that started E-Trade was on it. It was terrible at board meetings because they all argued because they had big egos. But we ended up doing 5 stores in the Valley. They're all profitable. We were doing 500 items a day out of the stores, and we tried to expand it out nationwide. And we did it too fast, and I didn't do the research correctly, and we ended up selling the company off.
At least you had an exit, right? You had an exit, so that's still good.
It was
right?
an exit. Yeah,
sure.
It was a shameful exit. It was a walk of shame.
That's why it's called Auction Drop.
It did drop.
All right, so are we now at Hollywood now? Or?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay, see? I'm trying to get to Will Ferrell, you know?
We're going to get to Will Ferrell. This is going to be the Will Ferrell thing. So now I'm kind of dejected after the walk of shame, and I thought, well, okay, look, I'll call out my friends at Sequoia. They like me. I mean, $20 billion, for God's sakes. And one of the partners there, a guy named Mark Kwame, said, look, you should do a search engine. Do a visual search engine. You compete with Google. Really bad idea. But we created, they funded it. We ended up raising $67 million and bought 4,000 servers and created a search engine that gave you as good results, because we had, search is weird. We had all these search experts, these PhDs in tweaking the algorithm, so they compare the result to Google and stuff. The secret is you can buy from the ISPs logs that have been anonymized, but you can see what Google returns when someone searches, and then you can plug this into an algorithm and figure out how you can do as good as Google. So it was as good as Google, but we came up with pictures of the web pages stacked in kind of like a flippable thing. And if you clicked on it, the picture would blow up full screen and you're at the website. And so it gave you much more information, not than just a list. And they had a list on the side too. And so it was called Search Me. And we ended up with 10 million uniques. But my problem was I was going on air nationally saying Marissa Mayer was, an idiot, and they had innovated in search in 10 years, and Google was just stealing money from people. It wasn't that bad, but it definitely got on their radar. And they had connections to Sequoia, and Sequoia was the lead. And when it came time to do the next round, and Microsoft offered us $200 million to the company before they actually created Bing, but the last valuation was $250. So that's another thing. Watch your valuations. Don't get them too high, because it sometimes blocks an exit. So, and so we did an exit, and it crashed and burned, and then Marissa's, well, I guess she's not working now, but.
So those 4,000 servers are in your garage now?
Yeah, well, it's one of the deals we made with the creditors was that they would get the servers. So they brought a semi up, and they loaded them all on the semi, and they're kind of delicate, right? And they didn't pack them very well, and then they forgot to hook the semi firmly to the tractor, and it went off, and the semi went boom like that. It was like, I'm like, oh, not a good thing.
There it goes.
Yeah.
Hello, 65 million.
While I was doing Search Me, Mark Kwame's son wanted to be in stand-up comedy, and Mark said, this is 2007, and 2005. Mark said, we should do a destination website that shows stand-up comedy or comedic videos. And I'm like, and then we go with my son on it. I'm like, okay, all right. So in the extra time between midnight and 3 in the morning, I'm like coding this thing. And I got some sort of package that I bought that you could do videos. I think they used it for porn sites or something. But anyway, I got it all working in about 3 months. We went down and we got Will Ferrell to be involved in it. He said, you can give me 20% ownership, but don't use my name at all. In Hollywood, your name is everything, right? It's not, if you have a bad, bad experience publicly, then you can't make money.
Can somebody edit the title of the event tonight and take Will Ferrell out?
Exactly. So we launched it, and he did this little video, and you've probably seen it, and it's old, but it's called The Landlord. And it's, they shot it at Will Ferrell's kid's birthday party, and the little girl's Adam McKay's daughter, who was 3 years old at the time. Adam is Will's partner in his production company and used to be the head writer at Saturday Night Live. So they just winged it, and this little girl would say whatever you told her to say with whatever emotion and intonation that you wanted her to say it. And so they shot this video, and Will's like, oh, my landlord's there. The door opens, there's this 3-year-old there. And she's, I want my rent, I want my rent, I want my rent, bitch. And something like, and she says all this stuff, really. And I saw it before we launched, and I'm like, oh man, this is either gonna be really bad or really good. I don't know which, it's on the edge, but these guys are pros, so. And we started it, we launched it in April, I think it was April 13th. And we took the passwords off, sent 10 emails out, no marketing, nothing. And I'm driving back from LA, and I'm going over the grapevine, and I get a call from the server guy. We're running on Search Me servers because we had a lot of them. He's like, what the hell did you do? We've got 10,000 simultaneously users on this stupid thing, like an hour after I launched it. And so, like 2 days later, we're doing 3 million video views a day on that video. And so I'm like, wow, that's really cool. And we had to put 100 servers on it and get a CMS and get everything working that way. And so we'll go to the meeting, and Will's sitting next to me. He said, I don't know what the hell happened. Ron Howard just called me and said, who's the girl, Will? Where's the girl? Want to sign her? Want to sign her? He's like, what the hell is this? And I'm like, it's the internet, dude. And he's like, wow, you can use my name. And now, of course, and now it's Will Ferrell's Funny or Die.
They put his name back on the title of the event. Awesome. So that's how you start working with Will.
Yeah, and then I was on the board of directors up until 2013.
Okay, and you did more with other comedians, right? Marlon Wayans?
An agency, I got to know all the agencies in Hollywood. An agency convinced me that there's an opportunity to do urban comedy, and that I should, and Chris Rock would sign on. So I met with Chris, and he's on the East Coast, and he wasn't doing a lot of work at that time. And he said, yeah, let's do it. Yeah, let's do it. And so, like, I started, you know how in internet time you start doing things fast. Well, in Hollywood time, it scares the agents if you do things fast, because you could, like, screw up, you know, the golden goose that, you know, or the goose lays a golden egg, and that was their bread and butter, right? They get, you know, 10% of whatever Chris makes. So they stopped it, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, I guess I won't do that. And then I said, oh, it's a good idea, I think I will do that. And so then we started interviewing, like, who was going to be the Will Ferrell of this urban site. And we interviewed like 10 people, and we got to Marlon Wayans' agent, and he was also Will Ferrell's agent, strangely. And he said, well, I'll hook you up with Marlon. And we got Marlon in a meeting. He was like, yeah, let's do this. This is crazy. I want to do this. Let's do this. Let's definitely do it. I've got a bunch of ideas we can do. And so we started doing urban comedy. Unlike the country club comedy we were doing with Will Ferrell, urban comedy is a little more edgy, which means that, you know, Procter & Gamble does not want to put a lot of products next to it. And so we have a little monetization problem there. And we sort of put the company into like quiet mode. Actually, I'm negotiating with Lionsgate next week to see if they can pick up the assets to use in Kevin Hart's new digital media company. So
you lived in Hollywood for a while, right? So what?
It was on the beach.
The beach, Malibu, right?
It was wonderful. It was expensive as hell, but wonderful.
So how is it different than Silicon Valley, right? We talk about the Hollywood of tech here and the Hollywood of entertainment there.
Well, I mean, I think that you can put together, it's like gypsies coming into a place and forming an entity whenever you produce a movie, right? Everybody comes from different places, and they all get together and they do the movie and they get their money in terms of the production crew and the talent too. And then they go off and they do other things. So it's like a whole bunch of freelancers mostly, but they're incredibly good at it, and they don't need a lot of direction. They can just, I mean, I've been on movie sets before, and it's amazing how it works. Now, it can take a whole day to shoot like a 5-minute scene, but you know, they do it over and over and over and over and over and over and over. And so, but it's different than the tech world because it's content driven, right? So I was sitting with Will Ferrell once when the basketball movie that he made was premiering, and he knew in the first hour after the first show was over in New York City whether the movie was going to make money or not, and it took 2 years to produce, and $50 million, and you can tell because the exit poll is accurate enough. So, and you might have a hit, you might not have a hit, and that's why Valley VCs will not invest in content deals because they're hit driven, and they want something that will be sustainable, that's tech driven. So, you know, if I was trying to finance something in content, I wouldn't even go up here. and down there you can do it somewhat, although they have a different revenue model. It's a studio revenue model. It's not like, oh, we own the IP and we're going to charge a royalty for it. I mean, Netflix does that, but it's we're going to make a movie and the studio's going to own it and give us a little margin.
All right, cool. But you moved from Malibu back here, you know? Why did you leave the beach?
Well, I kind of ran out of money for one thing, because I pumped a lot of money into it. When we didn't make we only raised $2 million on the Urban Comedy Company, and when we didn't make our B round, I guess it would be an A round. I don't know. It's all confusing. I just financed it for a long time, and then it just got too expensive to finance.
Especially Malibu, right?
Yeah, cool. It was very nice, but a while lasted.
You know, that's interesting, talking about the VC market in the tech world versus the entertainment business. I mean, they're VCs in their own right. I mean, they're dropping $100 million, not knowing if it's going to produce. I mean, you have a couple big names in there, but it's really a crapshoot sometimes.
Yeah, well, yeah, and if they don't have, you know, a bunch of successes in a row, then and Relativity Media is going, the guy that runs that is in big trouble, and bad things happen.
So you were touching upon this earlier, which is, you know, you've been doing this since, what are we saying, the late 80s probably, I would say?
Mid-80s.
Mid-80s, and you've seen different ways that startups have been started, you know, like in the early days with the traditional VC route was you had to raise, you know, $2 million at least to get you started, buy a bunch of servers, a bunch of licensing fees for operating systems. And
yeah, but you could raise it with a deck.
Yeah.
Without anything.
Yeah.
And there were only, you know, there were like a dozen VCs and, you know, I don't know, under 100 entrepreneurs starting things. Now there's, you know, depending on what level you're at, you know, literally hundreds and hundreds of VCs and thousands of startups. It's a different environment, and it's so easy to get, if you can get seed or friends and family, or, you know, angels and friends and family, and you know, there may be hundreds and hundreds of VCs, but there's still, you know, Sequoia and KP and Kleiner and you know, whatever Conway's calling this thing now, and there's a limited number of those. And if you try to go for an A round, you know, they may have bigger funds, but then they're looking at the later stage investments because they have to put money at work without hiring more partners, so they have to divide up the spoils. And so they basically are going to accept as many deals as they used to back in 1985. But there's a heck of a lot more people coming up through the ecosystem, and if you get to a point where you need an A round, you know, probably 90% of the people that go to the big VC firms that try to get money don't even get to have a meeting, because there's a gatekeeper there, and the gatekeeper's job is to make sure that the partners don't get bothered by idiots that, you know, like me or you, and so the gatekeeper is not a VC. He's not an entrepreneur. He or she is an analyst that's out of school, and then they can make two mistakes in their job. They can pass on a deal that they should have let through, or they can let through a deal that they should have passed on. And since 99% of the deals die, they always make the first mistake, not the second, which means a lot of times you might have a perfectly good deal that could be financed by these companies, but you don't ever get a meeting. And I've actually worked with companies that went out to Andreessen and went out to, and Mark's my friend, but it's just the way the system works. Went out to KP, went out to Andreessen, went out to Sequoia, went out to other major firms, and Draper, and they didn't get a meeting. And then I sent an email to Mark and say, look, I think this is a good deal, you should see it. And then he'll say, okay, well, let this partner look at it. Or I'll send it to Doug Leone and he'll say, let this partner look. Now, if I'm a bad gatekeeper, then I'm not going to do that anymore. Yeah. But so, and the other thing is, as you know, 99% of the deals fail. And they have to fail fast in most VC scenarios, or, you know, they're going to bleep a lot of money out of the thing. And then there's a couple of mid-runs, and maybe you get a unicorn or two in a fund.
You know, there's that zombie land between seed stage and Series A, where there's a ton of companies out there, and they might be dying on the vine, or they might actually be producing some revenue, but it's nothing tantalizing enough to get those Series A VCs interested in the multiples they can potentially create. You know,
VCs, the big VCs have to believe that you could be a unicorn.
Yeah.
Or they're not even going to talk to you.
Yeah.
And they have to see rapid growth, they have to see traction, they have to see revenue potential, they have to see customer acquisition cost versus lifetime value of the customer, and all those numbers have to be, have to check all the boxes, and then they have to see the potential for market growth that will bring them to unicorn level. And if you don't have that, they're not going to finance you.
What are you have any tidbits of advice to help these companies try to bust through that Series A glass ceiling, if you will? I mean, it takes so little money nowadays to start a company up, and so there's just so many seed-stage companies out there.
It takes very little money to start a company up, and because of all the available open source and cloud-based services, it takes very little time to spin something up.
Yeah.
My advice is to spin something up. Well, first of all, my advice is to take a look at the potential market that you're going after and calculate from a revenue standpoint how you can get to a high revenue number in the hundreds of millions of dollars annually. And if you can't do that, then you might want to find something else. And it doesn't have to be, Snapchat, right? They weren't making any money, but they got traction. Instagram, not making any money, but they got traction. And it's clear to see that if I have a company with, 50 million active users, I'm going to get funding, or I'm going to get financing, or I'm going to get acquisition, because you got that many users, you can monetize that. And so you need to think about how you can get that kind of growth. And if you can't get that kind of growth in what you're trying to do, then don't do it, because you're wasting your time, in my opinion. Okay, there's exceptions, of course. And so that being the case, you have to figure out how you can get what we used to call the hockey stick, right? How you can get that kind of exponential growth in terms of users or people that are using your service. And you just have to experiment, and there's a bunch of different people that have been successful. My thing is, people write these books like how to be successful in the entrepreneurial business. Yeah, and I was successful in the entrepreneurial business. Yeah, well, that was like in 1990, and it's all changed. It's different now. You can't. They got lucky, in my opinion. I got lucky in certain things. It's not a recipe for being successful. The recipe for being successful is trying lots of different things quickly. Fail fast, pivot, fail fast, pivot, fail fast, pivot. And if you don't get that kind of uptick, then you're wasting your time. But the good news is you can pivot quickly now.
Yeah. And I think that's really that's a great takeaway, is the fact you've been through this so many times, and yeah, we all hear about the successes, but you've had multiple failures at the same time.
Absolutely, yeah.
What are some of those attributes that you feel like you need to have? Because at the end of the day, we're lucky just to have one successful exit, whatever that is, But you've been able to have multiple. Is there something you feel like that just every entrepreneur needs to have in order to be successful?
It's the failures or the successes?
Well, both. As an entrepreneur, what are some of those attributes you feel like that it's just really important to have, no matter what, to be successful as an entrepreneur, as a startup founder?
You mean emotional attributes?
Well, honestly, half my meetings with our founders here is just that. Is just kind of getting through the panic stage sometimes of making a big decision. Not knowing. The fairly unknown is one of the things that for our founders.
My wife of 18 years said, "It has been a damn roller coaster.
Yeah.
I would like to just sit on a chair for a little while, please." So I think you have to be, but here's my problem. I like taking risks. I rode the stock market in '99 from $30 million in liquid assets to zero.
Yeah.
It was kind of fun, actually, but it wasn't, when I look back on it, because I'm trying to be grateful that, I'm still alive, but, it was kind of painful at the time. But, and you just pick yourself back up and do it again, do it again, do it again, and do it again. If you can do that, eventually you'll hit something. Yeah. And you can't predict what will click in or not click in. I don't think and the VCs can't either. I brought them Jerry and David and two guys that had a certain look, and they were, in PhD program, they're mid-20s, and they had energy, and one was marketing, and one was tech, and Moritz said, good, and they pattern matched. I brought him Sean Parker, and what was his partner's name? Yeah, Cameron, to Mike Moritz. A couple of years later, they were doing a company called Plaxo, and they looked a lot like Jerry and David. And that, and so Moritz invested right out, didn't even have to think about it. And I think that if they do a lot, I'm not just saying the way people look, but if you take a look at companies that you had that have been successful, and then you try to, you just pattern match, right? That's what they do.
There's a story with Mark Zuckerberg and Sean Parker, right? A story with Mark Zuckerberg and Sean Parker? That wasn't a social network? Did that happen? With
Which
pajamas,
story?
with the pajamas?
Yeah, well, let me see. I don't want Sean Parker to hate me. He's got a lot of money. And so, Plaxo didn't work out so well for Sean Parker, or Mike Moritz at Sequoia fired him. Won't go into the reasons. And then he ended up couch surfing again, and ended up, obviously, you know the story, he ended up at Facebook. And when Zuckerberg was trying to raise money, he wanted to go talk to, Moritz reached out and wanted to have a meeting. And Parker, and this is written up somewhere, but Parker said, because Parker and Moritz, like, hey, I can't even mention Parker's name to Moritz, he'd just get really mad. And Parker doesn't like Moritz either. And so he made Zuckerberg come to the meeting an hour late wearing pajamas.
And he got funded still.
Not by Sequoia.
That was like a $5 billion mistake?
At least. I'd say it was more like a $30 billion mistake. Valuation.
I know, right? Well, you know, you can win them all.
Only money.
It's only money. It's just money,
That's what
right?
I keep telling myself. It's only money.
I know. I remember Guy Kawasaki. He was supposed to become the CEO of Yahoo, and he turned it down. And he says, because I want to spend more time with my family. And he said, so yeah, that's how I lost $2 billion. And then it's like, so spending more time with your family, that explains $1 billion. You know, how about the other one? So he was trying to make himself better. So what are you up to now? What's going on? Still startup guy, right?
Yeah, I'm sort of incubating a VR startup that I'm working on. I'm advising two companies, one named Laughly, which is sort of Spotify for comedy, done by a guy named Dave Scott in the city. That just launched today. Check it out, laugh.ly. It's on the iPhone and the iPad. That's my commercial thing. Dave better give me some money. And I'm also volunteering at a place that's doing genomic cancer data collection and making it available to patients who are in stage 3 and stage 4 cancer, helping them find the latest treatments, clinical trials, and drugs. I'm working on starting a micro VC fund, but it's a long haul. But thanks to the advice of Mark Andreessen and stuff, and it's been helpful. And I'm supposed to be writing a book, but I'm not really writing a book yet. And someone said if you write a book and tell all the dirty stories, you could be like Disrupted, right? You guys read Disrupted, right?
Disrupt Silicon Valley.
Yeah, and tell all the stories, and then you don't have any friends anymore that you can talk to. So it's like, yeah.
Cool. Well, we'll put it on Kickstarter, you know.
Yeah, and I'm advising companies. I mean, my rule list may seem sort of bad, but I don't take equity, but I do take a little bit of cash if you have some funding, and I can get people, you know, financed. And if you want to connect with me, it's Silicon Valley Financing, all one word, at gmail.com. Silicon Valley Financing at gmail.com.
All right, well, prepare to crash your inbox.
It's Gmail, so I don't know, mail might crash.
But I would open it up for a few questions from the audience, and Matt is going to go around and give you the microphone so everybody can hear.
I think I have a couple questions here.
Hello. I have a question that these days it's very hard to keep up with the technology and the education, because when we do the education, we study the books material, and we come in the job market is changing very rapidly. What is a good spot to be to keep up with the technology?
I do everything online. It would be my advice. Go to one of the online courses. I mean, here's what's going on, I think, which is really hard. There are so many frameworks and integrated development environments to code in. You know, there's Node.js, there's Angular, there's all these MVC frameworks, and it's like a new one every day. And you can't. I mean, I can code, and I still code in like 5 different languages, but it's hard to switch, you know, from one language to another, because you kind of have to get into the code. So I think that if you kind of have to pick something that will have some longevity to it. And I keep telling my kids, my 15-year-old, don't go to college. Become a Unity programmer. because people are going to be programming in Unity forever. And it's going to be the whole VR, AR stuff. I think you kind of have to pick what is a sustainable stuff, and you just can't jump around. It's like, personally, I don't like Ruby, but you know, other people do. And for a long time, people were just doing websites in Ruby. Now it's kind of shifted. I think what you have to do is you have to kind of be active online, and you have to see what courses are being taught online.
Got a question back here?
I hope that helps.
Yes, hi. As you saw the internet as the big wave back in the 90s, what do you see as a next wave or waves that are coming, kind of the big waves?
I actually think that VR AR is a wave, and the only reason is because there's not somebody like Steve Jobs that says we're not going to produce the hardware anymore. That there's so many different people competing to produce the hardware that it forms an install base that you can sell into, and there'll be a need for a lot of tools and a lot of content. So I'm really big on that. I'm not so big on the Internet of Things. I think the evolution of communication in augmentation of bots for texting or AI in that space, it's going to be really big. I mean, if you think about the evolution of communication, I mean, it used to be the telephone, right? And then it moved into, you know, email, and now it's more moving toward text messaging, right? And then it's going to be the next wave of that. But go to a high school and see what everybody's doing on their break, and they're all text messaging each other, right? In class and everywhere. So these are all people who are going to grow up, and this is what they know, and this is what they learn, and this is going to be the entire population of users out there doing that. So if you can create things in that space, I think it could have a great potential. Internet of Things, like I said, I'm not big on because I think it's too early. I mean, there will be embedded sensors in lots of things and products that are being produced, but there really needs to be sort of an evolution of the platform to make it ubiquitous and you know. I mean, the funny thing is, like text messaging, I can text message you from any device. I mean, I can't FaceTime you from my Android phone, but I can text message you from anything, and it's ubiquitous. Ubiquitous communication, I think, is really important.
Question on the left here.
Hi, first thank you for this amazing event. I learned a lot. My question is, you say that one of the most, the biggest revenue that Adobe had was from trying to save trees. So this is what I call CSR models. So how do you think that it's actually possible to combine CSR model with profit?
With what?
Profit, like with profit, yeah.
Oh, well, it's like anything else, right? If there's a market and there's revenue streams and there's margin on the revenue, then yes. That there has to be. It's basic, you know, business 101. I mean, you have to, you know, be able to make a profit. Someone has to be able to make a profit if they buy your company or whatever, and they have to, and there has to be a big enough market to sustain and grow. So I mean, whatever you do. Does that answer your question? Really?
How important is that for you?
How important is what?
How important is it to be a socially responsible company, right?
Look, I've got 7 kids, right? My youngest is 8. They're going to have to go into the world and live in a world long after I'm dead. And there are certain things I believe, and it depends on, it's very important to me. I mean, I think that we do need to be responsible. I don't feel that and I actually want to do world-changing things that have a positive effect, as opposed to just make money or make other people money. And I think that's very important. But it has to be sustainable, right? It has to be sustainable. So, I mean,
Some VCs, like Social Capital, they try to build it in their thesis statement.
Right.
They try to, you know. It becomes
I've been
hard.
talking to some companies that are training inner city kids to code. And they give them $1,500 a month for a stipend, and they charge them no tuition. And their business model is when they go out and they get a job, they pay it back as a part of their salary. And they just started, and they're in Oakland. They're going to spread nationwide, and I think it's a great program because, you know, we're going to need coders in the future, and diversity among coders isn't that great. And it's not because they can't do it, it's because they don't have the opportunity.
Yeah, that's true. We have time for a couple more questions here.
Hi, my name is Yusuf. So you feel like so good now after telling so many good stories about you. But when was it that first time you realized that, oh, I can do something big, something big, you know, some incident happened, some emotional incident, or just like happened?
That's a good question. I wanted to get out of northeast Arbor, Maine, and it's crazy because in that far up the state of Maine, you feel like you're completely out of touch with everything. And when I went to MIT, I thought, wow, this is cool, man. I'm learning all kinds of really cool stuff, and the whole computer industry is moving fast. I ought to be able to do something cool. And I didn't really think about getting big. As a matter of fact, when I did the first, running a public company wasn't that big. I mean, it was like boring business. But doing that thing where all of a sudden I'm selling millions of copies of a piece of software I wrote while I was broke on an island, that blew my mind. I mean, it blew my mind. I didn't try to do it. I just thought it would be really cool to do this, and then it just happened, and I'm like, wow. I mean, so I didn't really think about I didn't think PDF was a big deal, right? It has happened so long ago, and it took us 3 months. It took Adobe 2 years to get out the door, but I don't know. I think that what you all are doing and what you're going to be producing over the next decade or two is going to change the world. I mean, and it won't be because you want to maybe get big. It'll be because you want to change something for the better. You know, whether it's disrupting some sort of service or finding the cure for cancer, or which is a very difficult task, or some other socially responsible thing that adds value. You know, people only use your thing if it has value to them. So you have to figure out a way that you can create things that add value, and then if they're promoted and you get lucky and the timing's right, it'll go big by itself. You can't plan for it.
Question in the back here.
Hi, my name is Ashish. Thank you for sharing your life journey. So I have one basic question related to intellectual property. You have seen companies, those are big, small startups in different domains. So at what point of a time for a startup you feel you should protect the intellectual property? And the reason I'm asking this question, because without forming a team which can complement each other, you cannot build a product or you cannot build a service. And without discussing idea, you cannot, get to that point. So it's kind of a dilemma whether to share that idea or...
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on the whole intellectual property thing. First of all, I think the patent system's broken in the United States. I think patent trolls are evil. And I think that, because it stifles innovation. But I also think that, because I don't think that, if you take a look at the iPhone and the Android phone, boy, their feature sets are going closer and closer and closer, so you can't tell them apart. And I don't know, did Apple try to patent stuff and protect it so that, Android OS couldn't do it? Probably. Would it have been a good thing if that happened? No. I mean, if good ideas are out there, they should be shared, but the person who invented them should have some royalty rights to it. So I believe that's true. In terms of when you should get something patented, nobody signs NDAs, right? I mean, they're going to find a VC who's going to sign an NDA anywhere. I don't sign them. And so you are at risk, but I always say ideas are worth very little. Execution's worth very much. So I always free-talked ideas with people. I hear ideas all the time, but they're not real until they're actualized, right? With an execution, whether it's code or what have you. And once that's happened, if you want to get intellectual property protection and you can afford a patent lawyer, file a provisional or whatever, you should do it. I mean, the whole idea about building a business is building a barrier to entry to competition, right? That's one of the things you want to do is make sure, and a VC will ask you, well, what's up? I always get these questions like, why can't Google do this? I'm like, well, Google can do anything. Of course they can do that. But will they? I don't know. It's a risk. So you can say, oh, I have a patent on this. I have a patent on 2D to 3D translation into VR. Whether it's enforceable, I don't know. But I think you should get one as soon as you can, but you have to be you have to be aware that it's expensive and it may not protect you.
We have time for one more question in the back here.
Thank you so very much for the great content. My question is about the most important skill set that an entrepreneur should have. So kind of answer the question, my question to answer in the previous one, but let me ask it again. It is said that salesmanship is one of the most important skill sets that an entrepreneur must possess. At the same time, when you go out there to sell an idea, they would ask you, do you have a prototype? So you cannot sell an idea without a prototype, without code. So how do you would practically balance between all the resources, given all the resources you have, improving your salesmanship and actually working on a prototype or on an MVP?
Well, I think that you should work on prototypes. I think that sometimes things sell themselves, and I've seen people that couldn't do a decent pitch get lots of money because what they had was pretty valuable. So I wouldn't worry about the salesmanship side. You know what? VCs are used to, I'm a geek, right? VCs are used to geeks coming in and they're not slick salesmen. In fact, if you were too slick, they get suspicious. So, you know, they do. I mean, they're like, wow. You know, Mike Moritz once said to me, I'm keeping my checkbook in my pocket when you don't present to me, Randy, because I get into it and then I realize, oh, that's not a good idea.
Randy, really appreciate you coming to speak with us. It's been your Thursday night for this.
Thank you. I want to give a shout out to my wife, who's going to see this video and realize I wasn't down here hitting the bars or something like that. And also say that one question we didn't get to, and what has been my biggest inspiration is her, actually, for 18 years. I bounce every idea off her, and she tells me they're stupid. Sometimes she tells me before I do them, which is useful. But it's been great. Hi, Nikki.
Good. Thanks, Randy.